So I'm David Corrado. I'm one of the four organizers of this meetup, um, and I've been doing Android and iOS for over 5 years, and I work at Warner. Um, and yeah, I'll get started with the talk. So basically, I'm going through Espresso and the intro talk. I just started doing Espresso in our application because I I noticed we had zero testing at all in app at Warner, so I thought this was a good way to at least get started because Espresso doesn't necessarily require any editing of your code. So you can keep your code as crappy as it is, and you can start doing Espresso code. But I wrote most of the application code, or at least a lot of the application code of the application that I wrote Espresso tests on. So it's only as crappy as I made it. So basically, a few ideas of why you should use Espresso. So Espresso is UI test in Android. So basically, you grab views by IDs or you grab views by text, and you can click on them and basically test your UI flow. So currently at Warner, we're exclusively using Appium for our testing, and I think we'll gain a lot of benefits from using Espresso. So I wasn't really told to do this; I kind of just did it. And because I was like, oh, you need to provide business reasons, and I'm like, oh, this is gonna take forever, So I'm just gonna do it because you guys aren't necessarily keeping me 100% busy, and I'm not gonna just gonna do it. So Espresso, it's easy to get started. I'll show you why it's easy to get started. It's an easy way to get test coverage. From my understanding, you can't get test coverage with Appium, Appium is a testing framework that's completely like black box. So you have no way to get test coverage because you don't have access to any of the code. Espresso, you have access to the code, so you can get test coverage reports. I haven't actually looked at them, but I've heard that you can get them. And then basically you don't need to change your application to make it work. So if somebody says, hey, you can't touch my code, you can still make this work. And you can test business rules, and people can look at the business rules to identify how the application is supposed to work. So those are a few reasons to use Espresso. So this is the basic flow of how to use Espresso. So you always do on view and then your view matcher. So view matcher is just something where you say, how do I find the view that I want to interact with? So you can do it by ID, by text. I'll kind of go more into that in a little bit. And then perform is what action do you want to perform on that? So generally it's click. There's some other examples I have in a second. And then the last one is validation, or it's called view assertions. And basically you check whether the view is visible that you want it to be visible, that the dialog is just disappeared that you want it to be, that basically you validate state with the last thing. So this is the first part of the three things they say you can do. So this basically is what can find what you're manipulating. So I kind of went through what I created. I actually created a Espresso test for almost everything we did with Appium tests. So I kind of got a good wrap around kind of the things that you would do. So the first thing is grabbing something by ID, which is the fastest probably way, because you're not searching everything by text. Maybe these are all the same speed, but preferably I choose to do stuff by ID. And then the next thing is you can grab stuff by text. You can do it by resource ID. So like the great thing about these kind of things is, like, let's say you change your resource ID and you do like a replace in Android Studio directly in your code. It should update your test. And the same thing with this. So if you were to use Appium, your test would just start failing because the ID doesn't exist anymore. And the last one is just an example of a more advanced situation. So basically you're saying all of these requirements need to match in order for you to return a view for me to interact with. So I say if the view, basically the use case of this is like if you have a repeated like include, that's what was my use case for this. So I had a repeated include, which all the repeated include had their own IDs. So the repeated include was with the OIV overage tag. And so basically I say if something, I'm trying to interact with the comment field, and if its parent is overage, then that's the one I want to interact with. And feel free to shout out questions if you have any, because I know this is supposed to be an introductory talk. So next one is view actions. So these are the 3 actions I was mainly, well, I think it was the only actions I was using. So basically, you perform a click, you replace text if you want to insert text, and swiping up. I'm just using this in a situation where we have a EULA, so you have to scroll up a page a million times, and I actually just called this like 15 times, or like 10 times, and it just swiped up really quick. That was the way I did it, but there's probably, I'm not an expert in Espresso because I just started getting into it, but that was the solution to make it go quickest as possible. And then the last step is view assertion. So this is where you actually validate that your test worked. So generally what I did is I validated that the page that I do a whole bunch of stuff, it's basically view actions and clicks, and then at the very, very end, I do a check to make sure that I'm on the page that I expect to be on. The second one is I have a check for making sure that so like I basically do a state where the action to submit the page should not be enabled. So that's another thing I'm using, and also I'm doing a check to seeing whether a view actually does not exist, and that's for a situation where I'm showing a dialog and I want to make sure that dialog disappeared. So the 3 view assertions that I'm using. So I will kind of go through an application that I use. So does anybody have any questions so far? So this is an application I created for a previous, this is just an application I created at a previous meetup. You actually don't need to really look at any of this code as of yet, but basically it's an application that demonstrates multiple screens.
I got a question though. Do you need to have the source code of the app to be able to use Espresso, or can you just have an APK and test that APK?
It's embedded in your application. So,
Okay.
like this is an example of your application right here.
Yeah.
These are really, really small. Somebody's gonna have to walk me through the commands over here, like how to make this. Command 1. So basically, these are your application, and then it's embedded in your application. So whenever you create an Android application, it generates these classes for you. So this application has no knowledge of any sort of testing that doesn't come with that isn't pre-built on your application. That isn't created when you first create your application.
Your tests in a separate kind of package.
Yes. So the first thing I want to show, hopefully, kind of doing a live demo, so hopefully things this work. But what I'm going to demo is the Espresso test generator. So basically what this will do is it'll automatically generate Espresso tests based on my clicks on the application. So hopefully this works.
Is that code usable? Because typically recorders just
No, it's not usable. But the benefit of it is that you can grab all the IDs without going through the source code, and you can grab text without going through the source code. So this is an application that I created. I think I set it up so control. So I'll kind of just go through. Actually, it'd probably be best if I zoomed back. So the application will launch because I ran the Espresso test recorder. So I'm gonna click on the first button, which is a fab button. So it kind of shows you it's adding the action over here. The code it generates is it doesn't pick what's best. So it doesn't let you like choose, hey, I would prefer an ID over text or something like that. It just generates everything. So it generates finding a view by text, finding a view by ID. So like that all command, it finds a view by text, find view by ID, finds it by what's the parent. It's a little too much in my opinion. So basically I clicked on that. I'm gonna click back. It's also really slow because from my understanding what it does is it runs a debugger and then it like sends commands to something that's listening to it, and then basically is tons slower. Yeah.
So can you record those when you have connected the actual device, or it's on the?
Yeah. When I ran this, you choose whether you want it to be on a physical device or an emulator. So I'll just go through and I'll click this menu right here. So it adds that. Also, something to keep in mind is this doesn't generate everything that you need. So there's times that you're gonna need to write some manual stuff. So specifically, one thing that I definitely had to write my own is scrolling. And you'll see when I run the test, it doesn't like do exactly what I'm clicking on. But like we'll click on general. We'll check on a box. And then we'll head back. And then you can't really see here, but at the bottom there's a. Actually, I need to click on that button.
We can resize.
I don't know how to resize this. I guess. Oh no, that's not what I wanted.
Can you use tab?
Tab? What do you mean?
And then
Oh.
Highlight it, and maybe you can hit enter.
So
You know where it's supposed to be.
basically, you can add an assertion too to say, hey, this looks like crap. Let's just try tabbing and clicking it, closing this somehow.
Maybe put a full screen to see if that helps.
Oh, there's a button. Okay. Well, so what it's doing is after I click OK, it's generating a class for me. As far as I know, this doesn't generate Kotlin, which is kind of sucky. So what it's also asking me to do is it's saying, hey, do you want to add all dependencies for the Espresso stuff that you've done? So basically what it does is automatically adds all dependencies you need to run the stuff that you just did. So you don't have to really think about it. So this application had zero tests before this. So you don't really have to think that much about what you're doing. So let's see if we can actually get this running. So we're going to run this on here. Control. We'll see if hopefully something pops up. So it seems like it's building. So it's extremely fast. Look, I failed. But it's never like 100% accurate. But basically, I just generated a test case there, and you can modify it for where you find it fails. It's really, really nice. I say you use the test recorder probably for your first few tests, or like I feel like, oh, I don't remember the IDs in there. I'm too lazy to look through the code, so I just want to run the test recorder, grab the IDs, and then I generally just copy and paste the IDs over and just throw the rest of the code away.
You say it's sometimes fails like that one. Is it fails because of it's recorded and it's recorded something wrong, or is it fails because
it fails because they recorded something wrong? I think I accidentally, I don't know if anybody noticed that, clicked on a button twice and it recorded it twice. So basically it's like, why are you trying to click on this button when this ID doesn't exist? You can actually look at the, I don't know how well this will work.
But basically, if I'm writing my test manually, if it should pass, it will pass if my application behaves properly. Or, I mean, basically, I'm trying to understand if it's reliable to say that.
Well, it's reliable, but you may have to make it absolutely reliable, mock your server and stuff like that to make it absolutely reliable. But in general, my tests are actually running against a server and it works fine. It may fail every once in a while, but
basically the idea is to throw in such tests in the CI pipeline. So
yeah, that's one of the goals is to throw it in there, and then we haven't put in an integration, but if I'm lazy, maybe try to implement some sort of retry policy if it fails, or actually doing it right and making it so the networking calls, or find out what the problems are and just fix them.
And typically, as you see, like the word is so fast. When you are doing UI tests, the pattern that you have to use is like find an object, wait until actually you find that object, and then do the action. So oftentimes, if your server is like 2 seconds late or something like that, you have to, the runner will try to act on some object that is not there. So basically you have to, okay, I'm trying to find this object, wait for it, okay, you found it, do the action. You didn't find it, throw an exception.
you waited by the time or till the object will show up?
I don't know how Espresso does it, but I have some experience with another framework. And basically you say, okay, no, it's summary UI test. So basically you say, okay, try to find this object by ID and wait, I don't know, 10 seconds.
Well, to give you a better idea of, oh, I screwed up. But to answer that question of how it works in Espresso, hypothetically, you should never do waits in Espresso. So in my application, which runs pretty regularly, from my understanding, it's called an idling resource, but I didn't have to write any of that code for my application, because what it does is it checks if your UI thread is not doing anything. So like it's embedded. It knows how stuff works. So it checks whether the UI thread has anything in its queue. And if it doesn't have anything in its queue, it checks whether the idea exists. And if it doesn't, then it'll fail. So there's no waits. But you need to make sure your application works for that. So like my application works for that because what happens is whenever we do a networking request, we show a loading spinner. And that loading spinner is UI work. So it knows to wait till that is done. But I've heard from a podcast that if you have a loading spinner that always shows, or some sort of animation that's always showing, the test will never succeed because it's waiting for the UI to be finished. So there's all this logic that's built into it that makes it so you don't need the wait. The stuff that it generates has waits, but I removed them all because they weren't necessary. Where's the code preview?
There's something called an idling resource, and basically you can tell it when your application is doing some work. So like, for instance, if you're making a network request, you can say, my application's waiting on this network request. And then once you get it back, you tell the idling resource, hey, I'm done. And then it'll go on to the next step of your
I didn't have to write any of that for my application. And also, if you abstract out your networking calls to just return models, hopefully you don't need those as well. But I originally started writing that code, and like there's a way to like do an increment counter. So you just say, hey, there's one thing waiting in the queue, and then you can decrement it and stuff like that. But I actually didn't need to do any of that. So it's pretty nice. Like I didn't have to change the application at all, except for sometimes the finding stuff isn't absolutely the easiest. So I sometimes just add an ID to stuff, or I don't think I like really changed the Android app at all for these tests. So this is the code that it generated, which is very, very, very complex. So you can kind of see that it's saying, hey, we clicked on the fab button and make sure that it's the child at this position, and make sure it's displayed, and then perform a click on it. So it's way overly complex from how I would write it. I would like it. It'd be optimal if they would like be opinionated, or like give me a checkbox to say, hey, only do it by IDs, or do it by position, that kind of stuff. So this is all the code it generated. You can kind of look through it when it generates it for your application. One specific thing that for sure doesn't work is scrolling. So I tried to like scroll to my EULA and it didn't do that. So I had to write that swipe up method like 15 times. What else was I gonna show? Oh, I'll exit out of here. So there, I kind of glossed over it, but there's two ways to run test. So this is the thing it just generated. The one way to test is to click this play button over here, and then what it does is when you do that, it'll actually automatically add it up here, and then you could save this. Another way is there's Gradle test generated for Espresso. So you can, if I'm in the right spot, you can just do this. I believe it's this connection check, or this one. This will be a way that you can run it on your CI server. You can just run that task, and it'll run your Espresso test that you generated. I think that's mainly what I wanted to go over. So what I'll kind of go over is what I actually created. So all the code that's generated is generated through for Java. So I actually just converted everything to Kotlin because I tried to follow Jake Borton's robot pattern, which is essentially page objects that are, if you're done web testing. So basically what it is it's an object that contains all of your IDs. So you don't have the IDs in your test. You have the IDs in this other class that manages IDs. So like you don't have 5 different tests that say click on this ID. You have one file that says click on this ID. So it's reusable. And then also it follows the builder patterns. So I'll kind of show you what I mean by that. I'm probably not necessarily doing this the best, but this is in a kind of a more advanced case. So I created a helper. So this is the test, just like yeah, okay. I'm just not gonna be good with navigation. Is it Command 1 to cool? Okay. So this is the test, and it's written with Kotlin, which looks exactly the same as Java. Like you probably won't even be able to tell the difference. It's very, very close. So the first thing I did is I created a helper method that does all the initial like login stuff and gets me pretty deep into the chain. So accepts a EULA, does a login, and logs in with a certain type of identifier that we need. Command 1. Then we'll go back to the curbside test. So after it does all that beginning stuff, it clicks on a menu, and then this is the kind of builder pattern I was talking about. So you can just put anything that you want to happen on the same view multiple times inside these brackets, and like add photo, and those abstract out the adding photo, because the adding photo is the same exact code throughout the entire application. And then
so in your object, you're actually separating the UI interaction.
Yep. all the espresso stuff is not written in here at all. There shouldn't be any espresso stuff in these test classes that I created. So what this is, this complete thing is it presses the complete button to go to the say everything's good, and this is showing. What it does is it says, hey, the page that you're supposed to be on, which gets returned by this complete, is it showing? So I'll show you the page inside of this, which is the curbside page. So this basically has the espresso stuff that you're expecting. So add photo, clicks on the add image button, and then we have a menu that says, do you want to do camera or do you want to do from the gallery? So it clicks on camera, and then it allows permissions if needed. So I wrote a little helper class that does that. So it does that twice, and then basically the next action you need to do is the complete action, which is clicking on the complete button. And then there's a dialog that shows every single time you're completing your action. So I just say press OK on that dialog, and then make sure, and then it returns the page that it expects you to be on. So then you could just say is showing. So this is kind of the robot pattern. Really, really quick. I have a link to it, so I know this is really, really high level, but it's kind of interesting to see how I actually did it. So basically after that is some actions I think everybody here should take is write at least one espresso test, so a happy path through your app, and then get it into your CI, or if you guys don't have a CI, continuous integration, like automated build process, then have your manual tester run it, or you run it before every release, and then add tests for all your new features, and then add some more tests to complete your code coverage so you can run more tests. Obviously, they say the best thing to do is to not have as many espresso tests and have unit tests, but I think this is a good way to get started in testing. So here's a bunch of links. I'll kind of just go over high level what you'll get out of these links, and then you can kind of go to it when I post the links. The first one is just documentation from Google. Second one is documentation from Google as well. The third one is a cheat sheet, so it tells you how to write the on-view stuff, and then the perform. It tells you, what's that called, the ham crest matcher. It's like a standard pattern that you follow to do that. The next one is just documenting how to use the Espresso test recorder if you missed anything. Hopefully this is getting recorded. The next one is anybody who's interested in more advanced stuff. The testing robots, that's what I used to create my pattern that I followed. So if anybody's interested in that. The Google samples for Android texting was just some examples from somebody that works at Google that created a whole bunch of examples of how to use Espresso tests and cases that how you can handle them. And the last one is it's like a Android documentation that they're good for everything. So basically, if you go to this page, I think they'll walk you through some of the basic stuff that you use to set up Espresso. So like the recommendation is to turn off animations. They'll kind of walk you through exactly step by step. They're really good at doing really, really beginner stuff.
Nice work, David.